Live television is meant to capture real life as it happens, but that also means there's no way to hide when something terrible unfolds. In this video, we'll go through 5 real moments where live broadcasts took a dark turn. These weren't scripted, they weren't accidents behind the scenes. These were disturbing events caught in real time with millions of people watching. It was October 13, 2008, in Santo André, São Paulo, Brazil, and 15-year-old Eloa Cristina Pimentel was at home working on a school project with her friend Nayara Rodrigues da Silva and 2 male classmates. The afternoon study session was meant to be routine preparation for upcoming exams, with textbooks and notebooks scattered across the small apartment's dining table. Eloa was a bright student with dreams of becoming a teacher, her warm smile and infectious laughter making her popular among her peers at the local high school. The cramped apartment on Rua Antonio Cardoso had become Eloa's sanctuary after her family moved there 3 years earlier. Her mother worked double shifts at a local textile factory to support them, often leaving Eloa to care for her younger siblings while maintaining excellent grades. Despite the financial struggles, Eloa remained optimistic about her future, spending hours tutoring younger students and volunteering at the neighborhood community center. Her teachers consistently praised her maturity and dedication, seeing in her the potential to break the cycle of poverty that trapped so many in their working-class neighborhood. The relationship with Lindenberg had begun when Eloa was just 11 years old, an age gap that should have raised immediate concerns among adults in their community. What started as innocent childhood affection had gradually transformed into something darker as Lindenberg's possessive tendencies emerged. Friends and family members later recalled how he would become jealous when Eloa spoke to other boys, monitoring her activities and demanding to know her whereabouts at all times. When Eloa finally found the courage to end the relationship at age 13, Lindenberg's behavior became increasingly erratic and threatening. But that afternoon, their quiet study session took a dark turn when Eloa's 22-year-old ex-boyfriend, Lindenberg Fernandez Alves, suddenly entered the apartment with a firearm. The relationship had ended 2 years earlier when Eloa was just 13, but Lindenberg had never accepted the breakup. Reports later revealed he had become obsessed with her, unable to move on from their teenage romance that had grown increasingly possessive and unhealthy. Lindenberg let the 2 boys leave but kept Eloa and Nayara inside, starting a hostage situation that would last 5 days and be broadcast across Brazil. Police quickly responded, with the Special Tactical Actions Group, known as GATE, taking over and beginning negotiations, hoping to resolve the situation peacefully. The next evening, Nayara was released unharmed, but 2 days later, police made a surprising and dangerous move. They asked the 15-year-old to go back into the apartment, saying her presence might help calm Lindenberg. As the situation dragged on, media attention exploded. News outlets provided live updates day and night, and the case became a national obsession. Things went even further when Rede TV journalist Sonia Abro called Lindenberg live on air while he was still inside with the girls. She spoke with both him and Eloa, and the call was broadcast to the whole country. Legal experts later said the call interfered with the police operation, with a civil case filed against Abro, accusing her of putting lives at risk. By October 17th, the standoff had gone on for over 100 hours. Police said they heard gunshots and decided to break in. GATE, along with military police shock troops, forced their way inside. Lindenberg resisted, and during the struggle he used the firearm. Nayara was injured in the face but managed to leave the apartment alive. Eloa was hit twice, once in the head and once in the lower body. Cameras were rolling as she was carried out unconscious and taken to a hospital, but she didn't survive. On October 18th, doctors declared her brain dead at 11:30 p.m., and she was removed from life support. Her organs were later donated and saved 7 lives. Around 10,000 people attended Eloa's funeral. Nayara survived and went through a long recovery, and in 2018, she was awarded 150,000 Brazilian reais in damages after the court found the state responsible for what she had gone through. Lindenberg was sentenced to 39 years and 3 months in prison, and to this day, Eloa's story remains one of Brazil's most disturbing and tragic cases. It was September 27, 2007 in Yangon, Myanmar, and for 10 days, crowds had taken to the streets in peaceful protest Buddhist monks in red robes led the demonstrations, walking calmly and chanting for freedom. What began as protests against rising fuel prices had become something much bigger. People were now calling for democracy, frustrated with poverty, military rule, and the lack of basic rights. In the middle of all this was 50-year-old Kenji Nagai, a Japanese journalist who had arrived just 2 days earlier. He worked for a small outlet called APF News, and Kenji had spent years reporting from dangerous places: Afghanistan, Iraq, Palestine. His mission was always the same: go where others wouldn't and show what was really happening. He was known for his dedication to capturing the truth, no matter the personal risk involved. Kenji's colleagues often described him as fearless but never reckless, a man who understood the weight of documenting history as it unfolded. His small apartment in Tokyo was filled with awards and photographs from conflict zones around the world, each image telling a story of human suffering and resilience that mainstream media often overlooked. Despite offers from larger news organizations, Kenji remained loyal to APF News, believing that independent journalism was crucial for exposing injustices that powerful governments preferred to keep hidden. The veteran war correspondent had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense when situations were about to turn violent, a skill that had kept him alive through countless dangerous assignments. His camera equipment was always within arm's reach, and he had trained himself to continue shooting even under the most extreme circumstances. Friends back in Japan worried about his increasingly dangerous assignments, but Kenji felt compelled to bear witness to the struggles of oppressed people worldwide, viewing his work as a sacred duty rather than just a profession. That morning, Kenji stood near the Sula Pagoda in downtown Yangon, the area full of protesters waving flags with the peacock symbol linked to Aung San Suu Kyi's political party. Despite the tense mood, the crowd remained peaceful until military trucks showed up. Soldiers got out holding rifles and shields, and protesters stayed put, some yelling at the troops. The military government saw these gatherings not as peaceful, but as a direct threat, issuing a clear warning: leave in 10 minutes or face the consequences. Then came the military's response. First tear gas, then gunfire. First into the air, then directly into the crowd. Kenji kept filming. His last recorded words caught on camera: "The army has just arrived. The army is over there. They are heavily armed." Then the shooting began, and Kenji was hit and fell to the ground. Even then, witnesses say he continued to hold up his camera, trying to document what was happening around him. A photo by Reuters photographer Adres Latif captured a haunting scene. Kenji lying on the ground, a soldier standing over him with rifle in hand, his camera still in his grip. In the next frame, the soldier walked away and Kenji didn't move again. At first, the Myanmar government claimed he had been caught in the crossfire, but video evidence later showed the truth. A soldier had pushed Kenji to the ground and shot him at close range. An autopsy in Japan confirmed this. The bullet had gone through his chest, hit his heart, and exited from his back. Kenji was the only foreigner to lose his life during the protests, with at least 9 others also dying. News of Kenji's death shocked people in Japan, with the government demanding answers that never came. Myanmar later apologized, but no action was taken. In 2023, 16 years later, journalists said they had received Kenji's missing camera from someone who wanted to set things right. The camera was returned to his sister, and that final footage showed the protests, the chants, the chaos, and Kenji's final moments. No one has ever been held accountable, but Kenji's work hasn't been forgotten. The Burma Media Association created the Kenji Nagai Award to honor journalists in Myanmar. It was sometime in 2003 during an episode of Consejo de Mujeres, a Mexican daytime talk show aimed at women. The program typically covered topics like lifestyle, health, and beauty, and occasionally featured live animals for educational segments. On this particular day, 2 animal handlers from a local zoo were invited to introduce a young lion cub as part of a segment about wildlife conservation. The handlers were seated with the lion between them, and nearby, a mother sat holding her young daughter, who was calmly enjoying a lollipop while looking around the studio. Everything seemed fine. Despite being a cub, the lion was already large and powerful, sitting on a leash and appearing relaxed. The handlers and show hosts were calm, and the mother and her daughter showed no sign of fear. No safety barriers or protective measures were in place between the lion and the studio audience. But then something unexpected happened. The little girl let out a soft whimper, and the high-pitched sound caught the lion's attention. It stood up and stared directly at her. The handlers quickly tried to get it to settle down, and it obeyed for a moment. Then the child began to cry louder, and without warning, the lion lunged. It grabbed the girl's legs with its front paws and bit down. The studio filled with screams as the mother stood up and tried to pull her daughter close, but the lion didn't let go. It pulled back, its grip unshaken. The handlers rushed in, one trying to pry open the lion's mouth, the other holding the animal's body. The child kept screaming as her mother clutched her tightly. The trainers, speaking rapidly in Spanish, repeated instructions like, "Stay calm and don't move," as they tried to control the situation. It took several moments before they could separate the animal from the child. One handler held the lion's head while the other pulled its body back. Eventually, they managed to get the lion to release its grip, and the girl was finally freed, crying and in shock. Her mother immediately checked her for injuries. What happened next left many viewers confused. The mother suddenly laughed. Some believed it was a reaction to the intense stress, a confused emotional response after what had just happened. Others were unsettled by how casual everyone on set seemed afterward. One of the handlers leaned in to hug both the mother and child, and the lion, still present, was even shown on camera again, while the child's cries continued in the background. The show awkwardly continued with forced laughter and uneasy smiles. Years later, when the footage was uploaded to YouTube, viewers began to notice unsettling details. Before the lion lunged, it had been staring at the child for several moments, and at one point the camera zoomed in on its face as if capturing something that was about to unfold. Though the child wasn't seriously injured, specialists warned about the long-term emotional effects of such an event. Strangely, no legal action was ever taken. The lion remained with the handlers, and the child's identity was never revealed. She was never publicly seen again. It was 1979 in Clearwater, Florida, when a new Christian-themed kids show called Joy Junction aired on the Christian television network. It featured colorful characters like Sheriff Dawn, Professor Cloudhopper, Whistler Dan, and a ventriloquist named Ron, who performed with his puppet Marty. The show focused on fun and faith, teaching kids about values, kindness, and staying away from bad influences. Ronald William Brown, the man behind the Ron character, was also active in his local Largo, Florida church community. He regularly hosted puppet shows, gave kids rides to church in the church van, and even invited them over for pizza before Bible study. To many parents, he seemed kind and trustworthy, exactly the type of person they wanted influencing their children. The show quickly became popular, with parents loving its wholesome message and kids enjoying the songs, games, and lessons. Soon, Joy Junction expanded nationally, airing on major Christian networks like Trinity Broadcasting and Family Network. It ran for nearly 20 years, from 1979 into the early 2000s, reaching thousands of homes across America. Brown used his platform to teach children about resisting temptation and staying on the right path, all while hiding something much darker behind his wholesome image. In 1998, police stopped Brown and found children's underwear in his vehicle. He claimed they were props for his puppets, and authorities let him go with no further action taken. Years passed without incident until 2012, when investigators looking into an online network involved in disturbing activities came across a man from Kansas named Michael Arnett. When they searched his computer, they found highly inappropriate images involving children, some posed in staged settings. But what really stood out were the chat logs. Arnett had been exchanging messages with a man in Florida, and that man was Ronald Brown. The two had been talking for months on a hidden forum, their conversations going beyond possession of inappropriate content to include detailed and graphic discussions involving children. Brown referenced a boy he knew personally from church, speaking of deeply troubling intentions and sharing diagrams and pictures he had secretly taken of the child. On July 19, 2012, authorities raided Brown's home in Largo. What they found was deeply alarming. Thousands of illegal files, some involving deceased children, along with written plans, drawings, and content dating back to 1978, a year before Joy Junction began. Brown was arrested and charged with possession and intent to commit serious harm against a minor. He admitted to the chats but claimed it was all fantasy and that he never planned to act on it. The court didn't believe him, and he was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, essentially a life sentence given his age and health. In 2020, Brown died in prison at the age of 65 due to complications from a neurological illness. After his arrest, everything connected to Joy Junction went silent. Networks removed all traces of the show with no statements or press releases, and even cast members distanced themselves. For a long time, the show became lost media, with only a few clips surviving, mainly from old VHS tapes uploaded to YouTube. Ronald Brown wasn't just a performer. He was trusted by parents, surrounded by children, and active in the community, which makes this case so disturbing. It was 1992 in Manchester, England, when Bobby Davro, a well-known comedian and TV personality, was filming the final scene of his show, Public Enemy No. 1. Bobby was popular for his high-energy performances, and physical fitness was a big part of his life. His father, Bill Nankivell, was once an Olympic runner, and Bobby stayed active through his work. At 34, Bobby had built his career on fearless physical comedy that often pushed the boundaries of safety. His willingness to endure pain for laughs had made him a household name across Britain, with audiences tuning in specifically to watch him throw himself into increasingly elaborate stunts. The Manchester studio had become his second home over the past 3 years, and the crew had grown accustomed to Bobby's relentless perfectionism and his insistence on performing every stunt himself rather than using body doubles. Bobby's athletic background gave him confidence in physical challenges that would intimidate other performers. He had trained in gymnastics as a teenager and maintained his flexibility through daily workouts, believing that his conditioning would protect him from serious injury. His colleagues often marveled at his ability to bounce back from minor bumps and bruises that would sideline other entertainers for days. This particular filming day had proceeded smoothly, with Bobby completing several demanding sequences without complaint or hesitation. The scene they were filming was meant to be lighthearted. Bobby was locked into a wooden stocks prop, his head and hands sticking through the holes, while his fellow entertainers Keith Chegwin, Lionel Blair, and Jim Bowen threw tomatoes at him. It was supposed to be harmless fun, the kind of physical comedy that Bobby was known for. But the prop wasn't secure, and Bobby had to balance himself on a box because the floor beneath him was hard concrete. The setup seemed routine, just another day of filming comedy sketches with his colleagues. Bobby had performed countless physical stunts throughout his career without incident, and this particular scene was supposed to be one of the easier ones. The wooden stocks were meant to hold him in place while his friends pelted him with tomatoes for laughs, creating the kind of slapstick humor that audiences loved. Suddenly, Bobby lost his balance. With his arms trapped in the wooden restraints, he couldn't stop himself from falling. He hit the ground face first, and Keith Chegwin later said the sound of Bobby's head hitting the concrete was one of the worst he'd ever heard. Thankfully, Bobby managed to turn his head slightly mid-fall, which likely protected him from even worse injuries, but he still cut his chin open and briefly lost consciousness. He was rushed to the hospital, where doctors were surprised to find that he hadn't broken his nose or lost any teeth. However, he suffered a neck injury from the impact and was diagnosed with whiplash. He was told to rest, but although filming had finished, the pain in his neck continued and spread to other areas of his body. Bobby later visited an osteopath who used physical therapy to ease his symptoms. Recovery took about 6 weeks, and he eventually regained movement, but the pain never fully went away. For a while, he couldn't even do basic exercises like sit-ups, and even years later, Bobby still deals with pain in his neck and upper back. Long car rides are difficult, and sometimes he experiences arm pain and headaches caused by nerve pressure. The fall was never aired, but the BBC now uses the clip for training purposes to show how fast accidents can happen, even in a controlled setting. Bobby never received compensation for what happened, as at the time, it wasn't common to file injury claims like it is today. It was December 8, 2016, and the morning sun streamed through the windows of the KXAN News studio in Austin, Texas, as Patricia Williams prepared for another day of delivering the news to her beloved community. At 51, the veteran morning news anchor had become a fixture in Austin households for over 15 years, her warm personality and genuine care for local stories making her a trusted voice that thousands of viewers relied on to start their day. Patricia had built her career on covering community celebrations, local charity drives, and the human interest stories that connected neighbors across the sprawling Texas capital. That December morning, Patricia was excited to cover the holiday season's most heartwarming stories. The show's lineup included segments about local toy drives, holiday charity events, and year-end community celebrations that brought Austin residents together. Her co-anchors and production crew had worked with her for years, creating a family-like atmosphere in the newsroom where Patricia's infectious laughter and mentoring spirit made everyone feel valued and appreciated. But for several weeks, Patricia had been struggling with severe headaches that seemed to worsen with each passing day. The pain would strike suddenly during editorial meetings, forcing her to excuse herself to find a quiet place to recover. She attributed the symptoms to work stress and the demanding schedule of morning television, which required her to wake at 3:30 a.m. and maintain high energy levels throughout the broadcast. Patricia had always been dedicated to her craft, often working through minor illnesses and personal challenges to ensure her viewers received reliable news coverage. Her colleagues noticed she seemed more tired than usual, occasionally pausing mid-sentence during rehearsals or appearing momentarily confused when reviewing teleprompter scripts. Patricia dismissed their concerns with her characteristic smile, insisting she just needed more sleep and perhaps a vacation after the holiday season. The production team had no idea that their beloved anchor was experiencing the early warning signs of a catastrophic medical emergency that would unfold in front of thousands of viewers. During a live interview segment about local holiday charities, Patricia was speaking with a representative from the Austin Food Bank about their Christmas meal distribution program. The conversation was flowing naturally as Patricia asked thoughtful questions about volunteer opportunities and donation needs. Then, without warning, she suddenly stopped speaking mid-sentence, her words trailing off as she stared blankly at the camera with a confused expression that immediately alarmed her co-anchor. Patricia appeared disoriented and lost, her usual professional composure replaced by obvious distress as she struggled to understand what was happening to her. She began speaking incoherently, her words slurred and disconnected as her co-anchor tried desperately to continue the interview and maintain some semblance of normalcy. The camera operators and production crew watched in horror as Patricia's condition rapidly deteriorated before their eyes. Then Patricia collapsed at the news desk during the live broadcast, her body going limp as she fell forward onto the papers and coffee mug that had been part of her morning routine for 15 years. Viewers across Austin watched in shock as paramedics arrived on set and began emergency treatment, their professional urgency contrasting sharply with the cheerful holiday decorations that still adorned the studio. The station eventually cut to commercial, but thousands had already witnessed the medical emergency unfold in real time. Patricia was rushed to the hospital where she was diagnosed with a massive stroke that had caused irreversible brain damage. Despite the medical team's best efforts, she died 3 days later, surrounded by family members who had flown in from across the country. The morning show went off the air for a week as the team grieved and processed the traumatic loss of their colleague and friend. Viewers flooded social media with tributes, sharing how Patricia had been part of their daily routines for years, her presence providing comfort and connection in an increasingly disconnected world. A journalism scholarship was established in her name at the University of Texas to support aspiring broadcast journalists who shared her passion for community storytelling. Thanks for watching. Just when you think you've heard the most heartbreaking live TV tragedies, we're just getting started. Click the next video for the next stories that will leave you questioning how quickly dreams can turn into nightmares. In today's video, we're looking at the worst Formula One deaths ever recorded, from a rising talent chasing his mentor's legacy to a seasoned contender fighting for a championship. These stories span eras and continents, but share a chilling truth: speed offers no forgiveness. It was October 6, 1974, at Watkins Glen, New York. The United States Grand Prix was underway with championship implications as Emerson Fittipaldi battled for the title. But away from the spotlight, a 25-year-old Austrian rookie in just his second Grand Prix was about to meet a fate that would shock even the most hardened racing veterans. Helmut Koenig had impressed John Surtees enough in testing to earn a drive with his team. After finishing a respectable 10th in Canada 2 weeks earlier, he qualified 23rd at Watkins Glen, ahead of established names like Graham Hill. His future looked promising. Teams were already discussing contracts for 1975. On lap 10, disaster struck. Approaching the hairpin at turn 7, a suspected suspension failure sent Koenig's Surtees car straight toward the Armco barriers. The impact wasn't particularly violent. At relatively low speed, he should have walked away. But what happened next was beyond horrific. The bottom portion of the poorly installed Armco barrier buckled under impact, creating a deadly guillotine. The upper section remained rigid as Koenig's car slid underneath. In an instant, the young Austrian was decapitated. Death was immediate. In a shameful display of racing's callous past, officials simply covered Koenig's car with a tarpaulin and allowed the race to continue. The Surtees team only learned of their driver's fate when word filtered through the paddock. They withdrew their second car in mourning. The tragedy was eerily similar to François Sever's fatal crash at the same corner just 1 year earlier. Both accidents highlighted the dangerous inconsistency of safety standards at tracks during this deadly era of Formula One. What makes Koenig's death particularly heartbreaking was its preventability. Had the Armco been properly installed, he likely would have survived. He had married just 5 months earlier, his young wife now a widow. Before F1, Koenig had shown promise in touring cars, Formula V, and sports cars, driving for Porsche in endurance racing. Despite limited funding, his talent was undeniable. John Denny, a Williams mechanic at the time, recalled having dinner with Koenig just days before his death. He was wonderful, modest, and gracious, just a nice guy with a lot of talent. Scott DeLong, a spectator at the race, witnessed the tragedy firsthand. "I remember watching the wheels of Koenig's car as he slid onto the grass," he recalled. "He did not appear to brake as the wheels didn't lock. There was no steering input. The car went through the catch fences like they were nothing. When the front went under the Armco, it bowed upward. The sound it made was a quick, dull thud, not as loud as expected." While Fittipaldi clinched the championship that day and Carlos Reutemann took the race win, Koenig's death cast a shadow over the proceedings. His story remains one of F1's forgotten tragedies. A promising career ended in seconds by negligence and poor safety standards. In the world of Formula One, some deaths become legendary while others fade into obscurity. Helmut Koenig's story belongs to the latter category. A promising talent whose life was cut short in one of racing's most horrific accidents. 50 years later, Koenig deserves to be remembered not just for how he died, but for the talented driver and gentleman he was during his brief time in the spotlight. His death, like many others from that era, eventually contributed to improved safety standards that have saved countless lives in the decades since. It was September 5, 1970, at the Italian Grand Prix in Monza. Jochen Rindt, a 28-year-old Austrian driver, was leading the World Championship by 20 points. What should have been a triumphant season would instead end in a tragedy that would make him Formula One's first and only posthumous world champion. Born in Mainz, Germany in 1942, Rindt's early life was marked by tragedy. His parents were killed in a bombing raid during World War II, leaving him an orphan. Raised by his grandparents in Graz, Austria, young Jochen developed a rebellious streak and an insatiable appetite for speed. As a teenager, he was constantly in trouble with police for his wild driving, and his wealthy grandparents despaired as he was expelled from several private schools. Rindt's path to Formula One was unconventional but spectacular. In 1964, he bought a Formula 2 Brabham with his own money. In only his second race, he shocked the racing world by beating the legendary Graham Hill. By 1965, he had signed with Cooper for Formula One and won the prestigious Le Mans 24 Hours in a Ferrari. His aggressive driving style, often sideways through corners, made him a favorite among photographers and fans alike. For 1969, Colin Chapman signed Rindt to drive for Lotus. The relationship was tempestuous from the start. Rindt openly criticized Chapman's cars as unsafe and unreliable, but their speed was undeniable. In 1970, driving the new Lotus 72, Rindt won 4 consecutive races, building a commanding championship lead. That fateful day at Monza, Rindt was practicing in a Lotus 72 stripped of its wings for better straight-line speed. His teammate John Miles had already refused to drive the car in this configuration, describing it as terrifyingly unstable. But Rindt, determined to secure the championship, pressed on. During practice, while braking for the Parabolica corner at around 150 miles per hour, disaster struck. The right front brake shaft, weakened by a manufacturing defect, shattered under the immense forces. The Lotus veered sharply left, smashing into the poorly installed guardrail. The front of the car submarined under the barrier, tearing the front end completely off. Rindt, who refused to wear crutch straps on his safety harness, slid down in the cockpit. The belt buckle caused fatal injuries to his throat and thorax. Bernie Ecclestone, his close friend and manager, was one of the first on scene. All he found were a battered helmet and a single racing shoe thrown from the wreckage. The tragedy exposed multiple failures. The brake shaft had been improperly manufactured, with a stress-concentrating lip left inside the hollow shaft. The Armco barrier was badly mounted, allowing the car to slide underneath instead of deflecting it. And Rint's own decision not to wear proper safety restraints proved fatal in what might have been a survivable crash. His death shook the racing world. His wife Nina, a glamorous Finnish model, was left to raise their young daughter Natasha alone. The remaining races of 1970 became a somber countdown as Jackie Ickx tried but failed to overcome Rint's points lead. On November 18, 1970, Jochen Rindt was crowned world champion posthumously, with Jackie Stewart presenting the trophy to Nina. Bernie Ecclestone was so affected by Rindt's death that he initially decided to leave Formula One altogether. When I saw he had died in the hospital, I decided to pack up working in Formula One there and then, he recalled. Though he would eventually return to revolutionize the sport, the loss of his closest friend left a permanent mark. It was September 10, 1961. The Autodromo Nazionale di Monza hummed with high-revving engines as tens of thousands packed the grandstands around Ferrari's home circuit. Count Wolfgang von Trips, 33, led the Formula One championship with only 2 races remaining. The German aristocrat was one solid finish away from clinching the title, representing the pride of his nation in Ferrari's scarlet machinery. Von Trips wasn't just another driver, an aristocrat by birth and racer by obsession. He'd survived crashes that ended other men's careers. In one instance in 1960, he broke ribs and suffered a concussion in Belgium. But 1961 was different. He was smooth, consistent, fast. Now he faced his own teammate, American Phil Hill, for the championship in Ferrari's unmatched 156 Sharknose cars. Formula One in 1961 was brutally dangerous. Drivers piloted 200 horsepower machines at speeds exceeding 150 miles per hour around circuits with minimal safety features, where spectators crowded against low fencing mere feet from the racing line, and cars launched airborne with devastating consequences when mechanical failures occurred at racing speeds. The racetrack's 6.2-mile layout was unforgiving. The twin bankings punished even slight misjudgments, while fences sat dangerously close to the pavement. Spectators leaned over barriers, no more than feet from cars traveling at maximum velocity. Safety standards were virtually non-existent compared to modern racing. At the start, Hill surged forward while Von Trips held second. By lap 2, Von Trips was defending his position, holding his line through Curva Grande before the long blast toward Parabolica. But by then, the roar of engines had already drowned out the warning that something was about to go terribly wrong. At 2:15 p.m., disaster struck. Von Trips' Ferrari edged left as another car tucked behind, drafting at over 150 miles per hour. Just before the right-hand bend, their wheels made contact, minimal but enough. The Ferrari snapped left violently, and at those speeds, recovery was impossible. Von Trips' car veered sharply offline, hit the embankment, and went airborne. The Ferrari flipped violently, launching up and over the shallow fencing. The vehicle disintegrated mid-flight, chassis tearing apart as it cartwheeled through the air. Von Trips, unrestrained by modern safety equipment, was thrown from the cockpit. His body landed feet from the fence, killed instantly from massive head and chest trauma. The wreckage sprayed the crowd with devastating effect. With no catch fencing and spectators packed tight along barriers, flying debris struck dozens. Bodies fell backward as screams drowned out engine noise. 15 spectators, including multiple children, died from impact with tires, suspension arms, and twisted bodywork. Despite the carnage, the race continued. Marshals secured the area, but no red flags were shown. Race organizers, fearing panic, allowed the event to proceed. Drivers weren't told what happened. Phil Hill won and secured the world championship, his victory forever muted by the tragedy. Von Trips was buried in Germany with full honors. The authorities responded by eventually banning banked circuits and mandating improved fencing. The Autodromo Nazionale di Monza would never again run in that configuration. It was May 8, 1982, at the Belgian Grand Prix in Zolder. Gilles Villeneuve, Ferrari's most beloved driver, was in a rage. 2 weeks earlier at Imola, his teammate Didier Pironi had broken an unwritten team agreement, stealing what should have been Villeneuve's victory. The betrayal burned deep, and now at Zolder, Villeneuve had only one thing on his mind: to outqualify Pironi at any cost. Villeneuve's journey to Formula One was unlike any other. Born in Quebec, he started racing snowmobiles, becoming a master of controlling vehicles at high speed on treacherous surfaces. His car racing career began late, but his raw talent was undeniable. When James Hunt witnessed Villeneuve's speed at a Canadian race, he recommended him to McLaren. By 1977, Enzo Ferrari personally signed him, seeing in the Canadian the same spirit as his late son Dino. At Ferrari, Villeneuve became legendary for his spectacular driving style. He would push cars beyond their limits, sometimes returning to the pits on three wheels. His battle with René Arnoux at the 1979 French Grand Prix remains one of F1's greatest duels. He wasn't just fast, he was fearless, earning him a special place in the hearts of Ferrari's passionate fans. That Saturday at Zolder, with just minutes remaining in qualifying, Villeneuve was frustrated. Pironi's time remained just out of reach. Despite his worn qualifying tires being past their best, Ferrari's wild child refused to give up. The team signaled him to pit, but Villeneuve kept pushing. As he approached the fast Terlemenbocht corner, he encountered the slower march of Jochen Mass. Mass, seeing Villeneuve approaching at high speed, moved right to give space. But in a fatal moment of miscommunication, Villeneuve also went right. The cars touched at 140 miles per hour. The impact launched Villeneuve's Ferrari skyward. In a horrifying sequence, the car cartwheeled through the air, ejecting Villeneuve, who was still strapped to his seat. He landed in the catch fencing, suffering fatal neck injuries. His teammate Pironi, arriving at the scene, was led away by Mass, both men knowing it was already too late. The racing world was devastated. Enzo Ferrari, who had lost so many drivers over his long career, was particularly affected by Villeneuve's death. The Canadian had reminded him of his son, and now he too was gone. Ferrari withdrew from the Belgian Grand Prix in mourning. The tragedy didn't end there. Later that season, Pironi would suffer career-ending injuries at Hockenheim while leading the championship. 5 years later, he died in a powerboat racing accident, the shadow of Zolder perhaps still haunting him. Villeneuve's death marked the end of an era in Formula One. He was among the last of the pure racers, those who drove not for points or politics, but for the pure joy of racing. His son Jacques would later become world champion, but for many fans, there would never be another Gilles, the man who drove every lap as if it were his last. It was June 13, 1982, at Circuit Gilles Villeneuve in Montreal, Canada. The Formula One grid was lined up for the Canadian Grand Prix, with 23-year-old Italian driver Riccardo Paletti preparing for what should have been his first proper race start. The young rookie, driving for the underfunded Osella team, had qualified 23rd on the grid. What began as a moment of anticipation quickly turned into one of motorsport's most horrific tragedies. Paletti's journey to Formula One had been brief but promising. Born in Milan, he had only begun racing 4 years earlier in 1978. After showing talent in Formula Superford and Formula 3, he moved to Formula 2 in 1981 with the Onyx team. Though his season started well with 2 second-place finishes, his results declined as the year progressed. Despite this inconsistency, his sponsor Pioneer pushed him toward Formula One for 1982. The Canadian Grand Prix was to be Paletti's second race start. Though he had qualified at the San Marino Grand Prix earlier that year, his car had stalled before the parade lap, forcing him to start half a lap behind everyone else. At Detroit, he had qualified but never started after his teammate took his car as a spare. Montreal would finally be his proper debut on a full grid. As the starting lights changed, pole sitter Didier Pironi's Ferrari stalled on the grid. Drivers at the front managed to swerve around the stationary car, but those further back had less time to react. Traveling at approximately 120 miles per hour in third gear at 10,500 revolutions per minute, Paletti had no chance to avoid collision. His Osella slammed violently into the back of Pironi's Ferrari with such force it launched the Ferrari forward, striking Jeff Lee's Theodore. Pironi, unhurt, was the first on the scene, followed quickly by Professor Sid Watkins and his medical team. But before they could properly stabilize Paletti, who was critically injured and trapped in the cockpit, the Osella's ruptured fuel tank ignited. A massive fire engulfed the car, forcing rescuers to retreat temporarily, while marshals fought the flames with extinguishers. Though Paletti suffered no burns from the fire, the delay in extraction proved critical. It took nearly 30 minutes to free him from the crushed cockpit, where he was pinned against the steering column with severe chest injuries. The impact had torn his aorta, and filled his chest cavity with blood. Despite being rushed to Royal Victoria Hospital, he succumbed to his injuries later that day, just 2 days before what would have been his 24th birthday. The tragedy was made even more heartbreaking by the presence of Paletti's mother at the race. She had traveled to Canada to celebrate his upcoming birthday, planning a trip to New York with him after the race. Instead, she witnessed the devastating accident that took her son's life. What many didn't know was that Paletti's father had been planning to finance the Onyx team's entry into Formula One for 1983, with his son as the driver. These dreams were shattered in an instant on that fateful day in Montreal. Paletti's death came just 5 weeks after Gilles Villeneuve's fatal crash at Zolder, making 1982 one of Formula One's darkest seasons. The accident led to significant changes in F1 start procedures to reduce the risk when cars stall on the grid. Today, starts are delayed if a car stops, and wet races begin behind the safety car due to the heightened risk in poor visibility. In his memory, a racetrack in Verano, Italy, was renamed Autodromo Riccardo Paletti. His story remains one of motorsport's most poignant reminders of the sport's dangers, especially in an era before carbon fiber chassis and modern safety standards became the norm. It was August 3, 1958. The Nürburgring's legendary Nordschleife stretched through the Eifel Forest, 14 miles of asphalt carved with 174 corners, massive elevation changes, and virtually no safety barriers. The German Grand Prix had drawn thousands to witness racing on what drivers called the Green Hell. Peter Collins, a 26-year-old factory Ferrari driver, was locked in fierce pursuit of teammate Tony Brooks on the rain-soaked circuit that punished any lapse in concentration. Collins was British, easygoing, and generous to a fault. He'd once given up his own car to help another driver win a championship. He mentored younger drivers and built close relationships throughout the paddock. But behind the charm lay courage that sometimes bordered on recklessness, exactly what the Nordschleife demanded and destroyed. Like the Formula One races at that time, 1958 was brutally primitive. Drivers raced 250 horsepower machines around circuits with no runoff zones, barely any barriers, and only leather helmets for protection. Cars could go airborne over blind crests at full speed, and in the unforgiving German forest, even the smallest mistake could be fatal. Rain earlier that day had left the surface treacherous. On the racing line, grip was returning. Offline, the pavement remained slick and deadly. The Nordschleife offered no forgiveness for miscalculation. Shallow ditches, uneven ground, and trees lined the narrow track where cars traveled at maximum velocity. That afternoon, Collins was flying through the field. By lap 9, he was pushing hard as he descended through rapid-fire bends near Wippermann, setting up for the notorious Flansgarten section. Another racer clocked him among the fastest through that split. Flansgarten was especially treacherous, a series of blind dips, jumps, and off-camber turns that could unsettle any car. At 3:20 p.m., disaster struck. Collins' Ferrari 246 was at full throttle entering the downhill section when a bump caught the suspension during a left-hand kink. The car bounced, lost traction momentarily, and drifted wide. With no modern downforce or driver aids, the rear tires slipped onto damp grass. The Ferrari lurched sideways and skidded across the narrow shoulder before dropping nose first into a ditch. The impact hurled the car into a violent flip. It rolled once, then again. On the second roll, Collins was thrown from the open cockpit, landing head first against a tree stump beside the track. His leather helmet, standard equipment at the time, offered virtually no protection. Immediately, time marshals reached him, but Collins was unconscious, bleeding from a deep head wound. The mangled Ferrari came to rest yards away, smoldering in the German forest. Collins was rushed to a nearby hospital in Bonn where doctors attempted emergency surgery, but the trauma was too severe. Peter Collins died hours later from massive cranial injuries. He was just 26 years old. His promising career ended by the circuit that had claimed so many before him. News devastated the paddock. Ferrari officials were heartbroken. One of his teammates withdrew emotionally from media engagements. Collins's funeral was held quietly at St. James's Church in Stone, where he'd grown up. In response, Nürburgring officials reinforced several high-risk sections with barriers and fencing. Collins' death added to growing pressure on Formula One to improve safety, even at the sport's most iconic circuits. It was March 5, 1977, at the South African Grand Prix in Kyalami. Tom Price, a 27-year-old Welsh driver, was gaining recognition as one of motorsport's rising stars. Known for his exceptional skill, especially in challenging wet conditions, many believed he had the talent to become a future champion. Born in Ruthin, Wales, Price's journey to Formula One was unconventional. Starting as a tractor mechanic, he quickly made his mark in local racing. His natural talent caught attention, and by 1974, he had reached Formula One. In 1975, he won the Race of Champions at Brands Hatch, a significant non-championship event, proving his abilities among the sport's elite. That fateful day in Kyalami, Price was showing his usual determination. During practice in wet conditions, he posted the fastest lap, even beating reigning champion Niki Lauda. The race began with Price starting from a lower position, but he was quickly moving through the field, showcasing his overtaking skills. On lap 21, tragedy struck. Renzo Zorzi, Price's teammate, had pulled over on the main straight with a mechanical issue that caused his car to catch fire. Two track marshals, including 19-year-old Frederik Jansen van Vuren, rushed across the track carrying fire extinguishers. The first marshal made it across safely, but Jansen van Vuren was caught in a horrific moment that would claim both his and Price's lives. Traveling at approximately 170 miles per hour, Price had no time to react. The collision was devastating. Jansen van Vuren was killed instantly, and the fire extinguisher he was carrying struck Price with immense force, causing fatal injuries. His car, now out of control, continued down the track before crashing into Jacques Lafitte's vehicle. The impact on the motorsport community was profound. Price's death was particularly tragic because many believed he was on the verge of greatness. Colin Chapman had reportedly been considering him for a Lotus drive, which could have led to championship opportunities. His hometown in Wales, where he was regarded as a hero, was devastated by the loss. The tragedy raised serious questions about track safety and marshal protocols. The incident highlighted the dangers faced not only by drivers, but also by the brave volunteers who serve as track marshals. The deaths of both Price and Jansen van Vuren led to changes in how marshals would respond to on-track incidents. It was August 17, 1975. Morning practice for the Austrian Grand Prix began under gray skies at the Österreichring, with teams scrambling to find pace on the damp surface before more rain arrived. Mark Donohue, a 38-year-old American racer and engineer, was still adjusting to European Formula One's demands. Just days earlier, he'd broken a closed-course speed record at Talladega. Now he was back to his methodical approach, calculating, analytical, determined to close the gap against better-funded rivals. Donohue carved out a reputation as both a brilliant racer and exacting development mind. He'd conquered IndyCar, won the Indy 500, and helped elevate Penske into a motorsport powerhouse. But Formula One was different, more technical, more demanding. The March 751 was twitchy at high speed, prone to instability under braking, but Donohue had faith in his systematic method. The track that day, Österreichring, demanded precision. Its fast curves and blind crests left no margin for error, especially on a track surface still slick from earlier rain. Drivers pushed hard to adapt, chasing grip on a circuit that shifted from lap to lap. Behind the scenes, crews scrambled to adjust setups before conditions changed again. That morning, Donohue pushed for consistency through Austria's challenging layout. The crew adjusted downforce and ride height between sessions, tweaking parameters to extract maximum performance from the temperamental car. Just before 10 a.m., he went back out for another timed run, carrying more speed than previous sessions. The track had begun to dry, but there was a tension in the air, an unease no one could quite place, and that silence shattered. As Donohue powered through the high-speed right-hander at Wursthügel Kurve, turn 1, at over 140 miles per hour, his front tire gave out without warning. The car snapped left instantly, skidding across the damp surface and crashing hard into the catch fencing on the far side. What began as a routine practice lap ended in chaos within seconds. The impact was devastating. The march disintegrated as it struck the barrier, shredding both car and fence. Flying debris struck a track marshal, killing him instantly. Donohue emerged from the wreckage conscious and alert, though clearly shaken. Medical staff noted a growing headache and took no chances. He was airlifted immediately to Graz Hospital for observation. Initially, his condition seemed stable, but that evening everything changed. Donohue became disoriented, then unresponsive. Scans revealed a cerebral hemorrhage, delayed trauma from his head striking a fence post during the crash. Doctors operated immediately, but internal bleeding had already caused irreversible damage. 2 days later, on August 19, 1975, Mark Donahue was declared dead. He was just 38 years old, killed not by speed or fire, but by the delayed consequences of what seemed like a survivable accident. Mark Donahue was buried in New Jersey, near the hometown where his fascination with speed first began. Former teammates, engineers, and Penske racing staff attended, paying tribute to a driver whose methodical approach had reshaped how teams viewed racing. In the years that followed, investigators confirmed a tire failure as the cause of the crash, leading to a $9.6 million settlement between Goodyear and Penske in 1986. Turn 1 at the Österreichring was reprofiled in 1977, a quiet acknowledgement that even the most precisely designed corners could still turn fatal. It was May 1, 1994, at the San Marino Grand Prix in Imola, Italy. The atmosphere was already heavy with death, as just 1 day earlier, Austrian driver Roland Ratzenberger had lost his life during qualifying. What no one knew was that this dark weekend would claim another victim, one of racing's greatest legends, in a way that would change Formula One forever. Ayrton Senna, a three-time Formula One world champion, had joined Williams for the 1994 season after dominating with McLaren. But things weren't going well. The FIA had banned electronic driving aids, making the cars more dangerous and unpredictable. Senna had voiced concerns about his Williams FW16, telling his team the car felt unstable, difficult to control. Despite his worries, he chose to race that Sunday, even placing an Austrian flag in his cockpit to honor Ratzenberger, after what he hoped would be a victory. That morning, F1 doctor Sid Watkins, seeing Senna's distress over Ratzenberger's death, made a suggestion that would haunt him forever. "You've been 3 times world champion. You're the fastest man in the world," Watkins said. "Why don't you quit and we'll go fishing?" Senna's response was telling. "Sid, there are certain things over which we have no control. I cannot quit. I have to go on." Hours later, these would become his final words to the doctor. On lap 7, approaching the high-speed Tamburello corner, telemetry showed Senna entering at 192 miles per hour. What happened next would be debated for years. The Williams suddenly veered off course, and despite Senna's desperate attempts to slow down, the car slammed into an unprotected concrete barrier at 131 miles per hour. The impact was catastrophic. The front wheel and suspension assembly tore loose, becoming deadly projectiles. A piece of suspension pierced Senna's helmet, striking his head with devastating force. Medical teams rushed to the scene, but Watkins knew immediately. "We got him out of the cockpit, got his helmet off, and got an airway into him," he later recalled. "And I saw from his neurological signs that it was going to be a fatal head injury." And then he sighed, and his body relaxed. And that was the moment, I'm not religious, that I thought his spirit had departed. Brazil declared 3 days of national mourning. An estimated 3 million people lined the streets of São Paulo, watching in grief as their hero's coffin passed by on a fire truck. Even his fierce rival Alain Prost served as a pallbearer, tears streaming down his face as he carried the coffin of the man who had pushed him to his limits on the track. In Senna's car, they found the Austrian flag he had planned to wave for Ratzenberger. He never got the chance. The investigation would later reveal that a steering column failure likely caused the crash, though debates continue to this day. What's undeniable is how Senna's death changed Formula One. The sport implemented immediate safety reforms, improved cockpit protection, redesigned tracks, enhanced helmet standards, and mandatory head and neck support devices. Senna's death marked a turning point in Formula One safety. In the years that followed, major reforms reshaped the sport, leading to significant advancements in driver protection and track safety. His family established the Ayrton Senna Institute, which has helped over 36 million Brazilian children through education. Even today, 3 decades later, many consider him the greatest Formula One driver who ever lived. It was October 5, 2014, at the Suzuka circuit in Japan. Formula One drivers were competing in treacherous conditions as Typhoon Fanfone brought heavy rain and winds to the track. Among them was 25-year-old Jules Bianchi, a rising star from Nice, France. driving for the Marussia team. What started as a challenging race would end in one of motorsport's most devastating tragedies. The race began behind a safety car due to the dangerous conditions. After 2 laps, officials red flagged the session as rain intensified. When racing eventually resumed, the track remained wet and visibility poor. Drivers struggled to maintain control, with several spinning off track as the race progressed. On lap 43, Adrian Sutil lost control of his Sauber at turn 7, crashing into the barriers. Race officials deployed double yellow flags rather than a safety car, and a recovery vehicle entered the track to remove Sutil's car. Just moments later, disaster struck. Bianchi, fighting to keep his Marussia on track in the worsening conditions, aquaplaned at the same corner. His car slid uncontrollably toward the recovery vehicle, wedging underneath it with devastating force. The impact was so severe it lifted the multi-ton tractor. Bianchi suffered a diffuse axonal injury, a traumatic brain injury where the brain shifts and rotates inside the skull, tearing connecting nerve fibers. Medical teams rushed to the scene, but the damage was catastrophic. Bianchi fell into a coma and was transferred to a hospital in Yokkaichi. For 9 agonizing months, his family maintained vigil as he fought for his life. On July 17, 2015, Jules Bianchi passed away, becoming the first driver to die from injuries sustained during a Grand Prix weekend since Ayrton Senna in 1994. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the racing world. Drivers who had competed alongside Bianchi were devastated. His godson Charles Leclerc and childhood friend Pierre Gasly, both future F1 drivers, were particularly affected. At Bianchi's funeral, fellow drivers Sebastian Vettel and Romain Grosjean helped carry his coffin in a heartbreaking display of brotherhood. Bianchi's death prompted crucial safety changes in Formula One. The virtual safety car VSC was introduced, forcing all drivers to slow down immediately when accidents occur. In 2018, the controversial but life-saving Halo device became mandatory, protecting drivers' heads with a titanium structure around the cockpit. Though initially criticized for its appearance, the Halo has since saved numerous lives, including those of Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc, and Romain Grosjean. The impact of Bianchi's accident was highlighted again in 2022, when at the same track and in similar wet conditions, a recovery vehicle was deployed while Pierre Gasly was still on track. Gasly, passing the truck at high speed, was furious. "We lost Jules already. We all lost an amazing guy 8 years ago at the same track in the same conditions, with a crane." Jules Bianchi was more than just a talented driver. He was Ferrari's test driver, poised for a bright future with the team. He had scored Marussia's first championship points with a remarkable 9th-place finish at Monaco, driving a car that was typically 3 seconds slower than the leaders. His performance that day in Monte Carlo had impressed everyone in the paddock, with many team principals taking notice of his exceptional talent and racecraft. Born into a racing family, his grandfather Mauro had competed in GT racing, and his great-uncle Lucien had raced in Formula One. Jules seemed destined for greatness. His death at just 25 cut short what many believed would have been a championship-caliber career. 10 years after that fateful day in Suzuka, Jules Bianchi's legacy lives on through the safety measures that protect today's drivers. His story remains one of motorsport's most tragic reminders that even in the pursuit of speed, safety must always come first. It was October 6, 1973. The morning sun cut through mist at Watkins Glen, New York, where the Grand Prix circuit twisted through forested terrain lined with unforgiving steel barriers. François Sévère, a 29-year-old French driver, stood on the verge of Formula One stardom. With another top contender retiring after the season, Sévère was positioned to become Tyrrell's lead driver, a rising star groomed to dominate the sport. Early on, Sévère faced rejection due to his Jewish heritage and flamboyant style, but by 1973, he'd proven himself under Stewart's mentorship. Disciplined, technical, charismatic, with raw, natural speed that few could match. The Glen suited his aggressive driving style perfectly. In 1973, drivers hurled 500 horsepower cars at over 150 miles per hour around tracks with almost no safety measures in Formula One. Just narrow asphalt, steel barriers, and no room for error. One mistake at the edge of control could mean the end. That Saturday morning brought qualifying tension. Every lap mattered for grid position. One of the contenders wanted to finish his career strong, while another had already posted a blistering time in his car. Sévère responded with scorching laps through the S's, the fearsome uphill complex known for high speeds and narrow lines. The S's were unforgiving. Rising through turn 3 into the right-left sweep of turns 4 and 5, the asphalt narrowed with little room for error. At 150 miles per hour, a tire an inch offline could trigger catastrophe. Barriers designed to catch rather than absorb lined both sides. There was no runoff, no energy dispersion, just steel. At 11:15 a.m., Sievert's Tyrrell entered the S's fast. As he crested into turn 5's left-hand kink, his left wheels clipped the curb, barely, but enough. The car destabilized and oversteered sharply. At that velocity, there was no correction possible. The Tyrrell spun clockwise, crossing the narrow track before the right side slammed into the barrier with devastating force. The initial impact lifted the chassis. Momentum twisted the wreck as it struck again, cockpit first, into the opposite barrier. A section of the barrier failed and bent inward, slicing through the car like a blade. Sievert's cockpit disintegrated instantly. The steel barrier sheared his body between neck and torso. Debris scattered across the S's as the Tyrrell's front end vanished. He was killed on impact, his promising career ending in a fraction of a second. Stewards arrived within moments. There was no need for medical assistance. Fellow drivers on cool-down laps caught glimpses. People had reportedly collapsed after seeing the wreckage. The racing world mourned one of its brightest stars. Sievert's funeral was broadcast across European television, a rare honor. Track officials at Watkins Glen later added sharp turns, called chicanes, to slow cars down through the S's. It was July 29, 1973, at the Dutch Grand Prix in Zandvoort. The Formula One circus had arrived at the challenging circuit nestled in the sand dunes near the North Sea coast. Among the drivers was 25-year-old Roger Williamson, a promising British talent making just his second Grand Prix start with the March team. Williamson had risen through the ranks of British motorsport, winning multiple Formula 3 championships. His talent had caught the eye of wealthy businessman Tom Wheatcroft, who became his mentor and financial backer. Together, they had plotted a path to Formula One, with Williamson showing the kind of promise that suggested a bright future at the sport's highest level. On lap 8 of the race, disaster struck. Approaching the high-speed tunnel Oost corner, Williamson's March suffered a suspected left rear tire failure at approximately 150 miles per hour. The car veered off the track, hit the barriers, flipped upside down, and burst into flames. Williamson was trapped inside the burning wreckage, conscious but unable to free himself. What followed was one of the most harrowing scenes in Formula One history. David Purley, another British driver, witnessed the crash and immediately stopped his car, running across the track as other cars sped by. Purley desperately tried to flip the burning March back onto its wheels. He could hear Williamson shouting for help from inside. "I could see he was alive," Purley later recalled. "I could hear him shouting, but I couldn't get the car over. I was trying to get people to help me, and if I could have turned the car over, he would have been all right." The race continued. No red flag was shown. Track marshals, lacking proper fire-resistant clothing, stood helplessly by as Purley fought alone. He grabbed a fire extinguisher, but it was woefully inadequate against the growing inferno. In desperation, Purley waved frantically at passing drivers, begging for help that never came. For 8 agonizing minutes, Purley battled to save his fellow driver while the race continued around them. When fire trucks finally arrived, it was too late. Roger Williamson had died from asphyxiation, trapped upside down in his burning car. The tragedy exposed shocking inadequacies in Formula One safety protocols. Marshals without proper equipment, no immediate red flag, and a fire truck unable to access the scene quickly enough all contributed to a preventable death. Purley was later awarded the George Medal, Britain's highest civilian award for bravery, for his heroic but futile rescue attempt. For Tom Wheatcroft, the loss was devastating. He didn't just lose a driver, his son Kevin later reflected. He lost part of the will to live. He lost part of the passion for motorsport. The Dutch Grand Prix continued that day, with most spectators unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded. Jackie Stewart went on to win the race, but the victory celebrations were subdued as news of Williamson's death spread through the paddock. Just 2 weeks earlier, Williamson had made his Formula One debut at the British Grand Prix, only to be caught up in a first-lap accident. Zandvoort was supposed to be his proper introduction to the sport. Instead, it became his final resting place. The most haunting aspect of the tragedy was its preventability. Had the marshals been properly equipped? Had the race been stopped? Had other drivers understood what was happening and stopped to help? Williamson might have survived. Roger Williamson's story remains one of Formula One's most heartbreaking tragedies, a promising career cut short after just 1.5 Grand Prix starts. His death, along with others from that era, eventually led to significant safety improvements in the sport. 50 years later, the image of David Purley desperately trying to save his friend while the world raced by stands as both a testament to human courage and a stark reminder of a time when Formula One treated death as an acceptable risk. It was August 1st, 1964. The Nürburgring's legendary Nordschleife stretched through the German countryside. 30 miles of relentless elevation changes, blind corners, and unforgiving terrain that had claimed countless lives. During practice for the German Grand Prix, 30-year-old Karel Godin de Beaufort prepared for another assault on the circuit he knew better than anyone. The Dutch aristocrat wasn't chasing championships or factory contracts. He raced for pure passion. De Beaufort had never fit the modern professional mold. A baron by title, he ran his own team, Écurie Marsbergen, from his family estate. In a sport shifting toward factory-backed precision, he remained stubbornly old school. His orange Porsche 718, outdated and heavy by 1964 standards, was a relic among more advanced machines. But this was his circuit, where experience could still triumph over raw power. In 1964, Formula One was still a raw and lethal sport. Drivers raced high-speed machines on tracks lined with trees, embankments, and little more than hay bales for protection. With no seatbelts, open cockpits, and sparse medical support, survival often depended more on luck than engineering, and the Nordschleife offered no mercy for mistakes. Trees lined the narrow track where cars traveled at maximum velocity. There was no runoff, no energy-absorbing barriers, just unforgiving forest waiting to claim those who exceeded the razor-thin margin between control and catastrophe. That afternoon, de Beaufort started conservatively, logging reconnaissance laps to read the track's changing surface. Later came the aggression, downshifts sharper, corner exits cleaner. He knew he needed a strong qualifying lap to justify his independent entry against factory teams with superior machinery. By mid-afternoon, conditions were optimal. De Beaufort came through Hatzenbach and Quiddelbacher Höhe cleanly, his 718 carving through twists with familiar rhythm. As he entered the fast downhill run toward Bergwerk, a tight right-hand corner fed by a high-speed approach, he was pushing the aging Porsche to its absolute limits. But minutes later, something went wrong. Midway through the approach, the car veered sharply left with no time to correct. Whether it was driver error or a mechanical fault, the outdated 718 shot off the track, tore across the grass, and slammed into the trees at full speed. The front end was destroyed instantly. The frame twisted as it stopped violently, sending wreckage flying through the German forest. De Beaufort, unrestrained by modern safety equipment, was ejected from the cockpit. His body struck the ground yards from the wreck, suffering massive trauma to skull, chest, and legs. Marshals reached him within minutes. He was alive but barely responsive. With no on-site medical center capable of handling such injuries, he was rushed to Koblenz by ambulance, then airlifted to Cologne that evening. Emergency surgery was performed, but the internal damage was too extensive. Karel Godin de Beaufort never regained consciousness. He died the next day from head injuries at age 30, another victim of the circuit he'd mastered but could never truly conquer. His funeral at the Marsbergen estate drew a somber crowd of family, fellow racers, and Dutch motorsport officials. The service was private, with Karel buried near the grounds where he'd first fallen in love with speed. In the wake of his death, Nürburgring officials quietly installed reinforced fencing at several high-speed corners and expanded on-site medical staffing. While the changes were modest, they marked an early shift toward acknowledging the track's deadly reputation. It was April 30th, 1994, at the San Marino Grand Prix in Imola, Italy. Roland Ratzenberger, a 33-year-old Austrian driver, was attempting to qualify for only his second Formula One race. What started as a dream come true would end in a tragedy that would forever be overshadowed by the events that followed, just 24 hours later. Ratzenberger's path to Formula One was far from typical. Born in Austria, he was a true grafter, working his way up through the ranks without the family support many drivers enjoyed. His father wasn't keen on racing, but Roland persisted, earning respect not just for his ability behind the wheel, but for his relentless work ethic. In 1986, he won the prestigious Formula Ford Festival at Brands Hatch, but with no clear path forward, he took his talents to Japan, racing in various series while dreaming of Formula One. The journey was long and difficult. While other drivers had wealthy backers or family connections, Ratzenberger often served as his own mechanic, team manager, and driver all at once. He competed in touring cars, Japanese Formula 3000, and even the Le Mans 24 Hours, taking any opportunity to prove himself. His determination finally paid off when he secured backing from a wealthy Monaco businesswoman, Barbara Bellau, who helped him secure a seat with the new Simtek team for 1994. After years of struggle and determination, Ratzenberger finally achieved his dream in 1994. His first race in Brazil ended in disappointment when he failed to qualify, but in Japan at Aida, he made the grid and finished 11th, a remarkable achievement for both driver and team. Now at Imola, he was eager to prove himself again. The weekend had started with promise. Ratzenberger was getting more comfortable with the car, though he had complained about the carbon brakes, something new to him. His teammate, David Brabham, had tested the brakes and confirmed they needed changing. With new brakes fitted, Roland's confidence grew, and his pace improved significantly. During qualifying, Ratzenberger was pushing hard to make the grid. His previous lap time was 1 minute, 27 seconds, and 584 milliseconds would have been enough to qualify, but he wanted more. What he didn't know was that a previous impact with a curb at Ac Minerali had damaged his front wing. As he approached the high-speed Villeneuve corner at 195 miles per hour, the wing failed catastrophically, becoming lodged under the front wheels. The impact was devastating. His Simtek slammed into the concrete wall with a force of 500 G, the highest ever recorded in Formula One. Ratzenberger suffered 3 fatal injuries: a basilar skull fracture, the same injury that would later claim Dale Earnhardt Sr., a ruptured aorta, and blunt trauma from suspension pieces piercing the survival cell. David Brabham, passing the accident scene, knew immediately from the position of Roland's head that he was gone. The paddock was stunned. It was the first death during a Grand Prix weekend in 12 years. Ayrton Senna, who would tragically lose his own life the next day, was deeply affected. He borrowed an Austrian flag, planning to raise it after winning the race in Roland's honor, a gesture he would never get to make. Senna even joined Professor Sid Watkins, the F1 doctor in the medical helicopter, as they rushed Ratzenberger to the hospital, though it was already too late. Nick Wirth, Simtek's founder and car designer, watched the catastrophe unfold on a television monitor. "I'll never ever forget it," he said. "To see Roland lying on the grass receiving heart massage. Your body behaves in very strange ways at times like that. You literally lose control. Your legs turn to jelly, and you feel you want to throw up." The guilt of being both team owner and car designer weighed heavily on him, though investigations would later show the accident was caused by unforeseen circumstances rather than design flaws. Only 4 Formula One drivers attended Ratzenberger's funeral: Gerhard Berger, Heinz-Harald Frentzen, Karl Wendlinger, and Johnny Herbert. While 3 million people lined the streets for Senna's funeral in Brazil, about 250 people gathered in Salzburg to bid farewell to Roland. His parents, Rudolf and Margit, moved into their son's flat after his death, surrounding themselves with his trophies and memories. The tragedy exposed the limitations of qualifying regulations. Had Ratzenberger not been under pressure to maximize every lap, he might have chosen to pit and check the car after the initial impact that damaged his wing. Instead, he pressed on, a decision that would cost him everything. His death, along with Senna's the following day, led to fundamental changes in Formula One safety, including improved crash structures, better cockpit protection, and stricter technical regulations. 20 years later, Ratzenberger's parents returned to Imola for the first time since his death. "We were just happy that he'd achieved his dream to be a driver in Formula One," his father Rudolf said. "It had been a long time driving in Japan, Germany, and England to get there. I didn't see one of his Grands Prix. I've never wished that he didn't do Formula One. No, because that was what he wanted to do. That was his dream." It was May 14, 1986. At the Paul Ricard circuit in France, Formula One teams were conducting routine testing between races, with drivers pushing their cars to the limit on the high-speed track. Among them was 28-year-old Elio De Angelis, an Italian driver known for his smooth style and aristocratic demeanor. What began as a normal testing day would end in one of motorsport's most preventable tragedies. De Angelis was driving the radical Brabham BT55, designed by Gordon Murray. The car featured an innovative low-line design, with the BMW engine tilted to improve aerodynamics. Though revolutionary in concept, The car had proven difficult to drive and unreliable in the early races of 1986. DeAngelis, who had joined Brabham after 6 successful seasons with Lotus, was working to improve the troublesome machine. At approximately 11 a.m., DeAngelis was navigating the high-speed S-band known as the Verrerie curve when disaster struck. The rear wing of his Brabham suddenly detached at nearly 180 miles per hour, causing an immediate loss of downforce. The car became airborne, flipped multiple times, and crashed violently over the guardrail. It came to rest upside down, trapping DeAngelis inside as fuel began to leak from the damaged tank. What happened next exposed the shocking inadequacy of safety measures during testing sessions. Unlike race weekends, there were few marshals present, no medical helicopter on standby, and minimal emergency equipment available. Only 2 Benetton mechanics who happened to be in the pits witnessed the accident. They rushed to the scene but had no proper firefighting equipment. As the car caught fire, those present struggled desperately to right the overturned Brabham and extract DeAngelis. Alan Jones, who had been preparing to start his own testing run, was among the first drivers to arrive. He later described finding marshals in shorts who didn't have a clue how to handle the situation. The fire kept flaring up, fed by leaking fuel, while DeAngelis remained trapped inside. Remarkably, DeAngelis had survived the impact with only a broken collarbone. It was not the crash that threatened his life, but the smoke and fumes he was inhaling while trapped in the burning car. By the time rescuers managed to extract him, he had been starved of oxygen for critical minutes. A helicopter finally arrived 30 minutes after the accident to transport him to a hospital in Marseille. Despite doctors' efforts, Elio DeAngelis died the following day from smoke inhalation. His death was particularly shocking because his injuries from the actual crash were relatively minor. Had proper rescue equipment and personnel been present, he likely would have survived. DeAngelis was more than just a talented driver. Known as Formula One's last gentleman, he came from a wealthy Roman family, but earned respect through his skill and character. He was an accomplished classical pianist who once entertained his fellow drivers during the 1982 drivers' strike in South Africa. In 108th Grand Prix starts, he had secured 2 victories and 122 career points. His death prompted significant changes to testing safety protocols. The FIA eventually mandated that test sessions must have the same safety standards as race weekends, including medical helicopters and proper emergency response teams. Gordon Murray, devastated by the loss of a driver in one of his cars, was never quite the same afterward. 25 years would pass before another Formula One driver died from injuries sustained on track. Elio DeAngelis' legacy lives on as a reminder that in motorsport, safety can never be compromised, even when the cameras aren't rolling. It was October 19, 1958. The Moroccan Grand Prix unfolded on Casablanca's brutal Ain Diab street circuit, a high-speed loop of public roads carved through desert sand and coastal winds. The sun-pounded tarmac baking in 100 degrees Fahrenheit heat as the final Formula One championship round reached its climax. Stuart Lewis Evans, a 28-year-old Briton driving for Vanwall, had one mission: finish strong and support teammate Sterling Moss's title bid. Lewis Evans wasn't born into racing privilege. Originally a mechanic, he'd clawed his way into Formula One through grit and technical skill. His team owner saw promise in the quiet, determined driver and gave him a shot alongside established stars like Moss. While Moss grabbed headlines, Lewis Evans quietly delivered, often outperforming more experienced names in the temperamental but powerful Vanwall machines. In 1958, Formula One was a gamble with death at every corner. Drivers raced lightweight, fuel-heavy cars on narrow circuits lined with trees and walls, with little to protect them if something went wrong. Fires were common, rescue teams were slow, and even minor failures could end in disaster. Every race demanded not just skill, but the constant hope that nothing would break before the checkered flag. Additionally, the Ain Diab circuit had public roads that offered no safety barriers, just shallow ditches and trees lining the racing line. Oil spots, dust, and rubber coated the deteriorating surface as cooling systems struggled in the oppressive heat. Cars were pushed beyond their mechanical limits in conditions that punished any failure. By lap 40, the track had begun disintegrating. Lewis Evans was running 5th, pressing hard despite having to replace his car to mechanical failure earlier. The remaining cars battled extreme conditions as engines strained against the relentless desert heat. As the laps wore on, the field began to stretch out. engines straining under the late race heat. Then, without warning, disaster unfolded as Lewis Evans charged down the straight, his car at full throttle and the engine under heavy load. The sudden seizure locked the rear wheels, sending the car into a violent spin on a circuit with no runoff, no barriers, and nowhere to go but into danger. The van wall slid sideways, hit a shallow ditch, and launched airborne. It rolled violently, nose over tail, crashing into trees beyond the circuit boundary. The impact ruptured fuel lines instantly. Flames ignited immediately, engulfing the car in a devastating fireball. Trapped in the cockpit, Lewis Evans struggled desperately to escape. Moments later, he emerged staggering from the wreck, hands shielding his face from flames that clung to his racing suit. Marshals rushed in with sand and extinguishers, but the damage was catastrophic. Over 75% of his body suffered severe burns. Arms, legs, back, and face. Shock set in as his breathing became shallow. He was stabilized immediately and flown by military aircraft back to Britain that evening. Doctors at Queen Victoria Hospital in East Grinstead, specialists in burn treatment, fought around the clock to save him. For 6 days, they battled complications from infection and organ failure. But on October 25th, Stuart Lewis Evans died from septicemia. He was just 28 years old. Stuart Lewis Evans was buried in his hometown of Walthamstow, with fellow drivers, mechanics, and members of the Van Wall team in attendance. The funeral was simple, but heavy with grief, marking how quickly the sport could take its brightest talents. His death devastated the racing world. Team owner Tony van der Velde, heartbroken, pulled Van Wall from Formula One at its peak, and the Casablanca Grand Prix was never held again. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.